Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Costain. It's been proposed that a review of Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act could help to address UK flooding. I spoke to Mark Topping, Director of Design at Lanpro, and I asked him what is Schedule 3 and how might changing it help to reduce flooding.
So Schedule 3 is about making sustainable drainage systems a legal requirement rather than a recommendation. In terms of how it can help to reduce flooding in the UK, numerous various ways essentially. So it promotes SUDs across development sites in England in a legislative way, and essentially creates sustainable drainage approving bodies, say SABs. So it gives the local authority a service and some teeth to actually monitor the design process. And also the maintenance process, which is a really sort of important part of the success of these schemes. It promotes essentially a simple focus on simple, robust, nature-based design. So that's and the sort of simplicity of this is a really key factor because it means that it's cost effective for developers, and natural systems do tend to be simple in their sort of form and nature. So it also as I said, sort of the enforcement of SUDs and the reinforcement of best practice principles is a really core aspect, and then controlled by the local authority that are set up to do that. And I think for me, one of the largest benefits is it similar to BNG. It places flood risk at the center of the master planning process. So it invites collaboration between landscape architects, ecologists, arboriculturists, civil engineers, architects. You can go on, but it means that it's not a sort of afterthought. It's not something that's tucked away at the back of a development site. It's something that's integral to the social, environmental, and economic thought process.
And why Schedule 3? What is it about Schedule 3 that stops this happening at the moment, and why would amending it make that difference?
At the moment, since the sort of PIP review, it's been a recommendation as opposed to legislation. So the legislation is the key change. It's something that has to now be done on development sites over a certain size of about 100 meters squared, I think. So it's that sort of legislative nature that means that it's embedded in the planning process.
Could you talk me through some examples of sustainable drainage systems or SUDs?
Yeah, so I've been involved in numerous systems, but two in particular. Firstly, the Terry's Chocolate Factory in York. So this is the site of the former Terry's Chocolate Factory, which had a particular issue in terms of drainage and certainly sustainable drainage. The site had a very large 1.5 meter deep concrete pad. So quite challenging in terms of delivering something innovative and also cost effective. So we were asked to look at alternatives on site, and this is very urban site, but there's one area of open space which we felt was suitable. We wanted to create usable public open space as well, so a sort of integrated system. And so we did a lot of work at the start of the process, looking at the fabric of the site, so existing trees, ecology, aspects, and really the design is focused on those points. So the shape of the site, the SUDS basin that we've created, is based on the root protection areas of existing trees. It's very subtle, so it's almost ignorable from a floods perspective. It serves as a function without getting in the way of the sort of recreational uses that it also needs to serve. And then in times of particular heavy rainfall, it has storm cells that have been constructed underneath it, so those will fill first, and as they reach capacity, then the recreational space essentially slowly sort of fills up, and then slowly drains back down into the storm cells. So it's never actually sort of causing an issue in terms of capacity. And going through this process, we managed to save the client over £1 million between the conventional drainage approach and the sort of simple nature-based SUDS alternative, and worked with the fabric to retain those trees.
When you talk about storm cells, what are they and what are they made from?
Usually recycled plastic. So they're stable, so they don't actually corrode and wash into the watercourse, and they're covered by geomembranes to stop sort of them filling up with soils and keep the whole structure stable. So the process in itself is has been considered in terms of materials of the wider system as well. Another example was Northminster Business Park. This was a slightly different challenge where we had quite a high water table, so things like permeable surfacing were not possible. So we had it was an offices for a large shoe manufacturing company, and we went with a conventional car park surface, impermeable, which sounds sort of counterintuitive, but we worked very closely with the civil engineer, and we graded everything to fall to a series of swales which ran around the perimeter of the car park. Within those swales, we planted things like cattail irises. So from a visual perspective, it worked, but also they phytoremediated some of the potential pollutants that might be in the water, such as oils and screen wash. And then it was designed to sort of slowly meander to a low point and into a piece of land art. So it was a sort of simple circular piece of land art, like a corkscrew. So the water sort of flowed down to a central piece and again into a series of storm cells, which were actually used for wheel washing of some of the vehicles and for grey water recycling. So it was a simple but interesting. And now the space is used by the office workers on site for lunches and for recreation.
Fantastic. Now, you're also proposing that an approach to water management based on the principles of biodiversity net gain could further mitigate flood risk. How would that work?
So using the principles of BNG to mitigate flood risk, essentially it's looking at the long-term pressures that brought about by the reason for having the SUDs in the first place. You know, the 1 in 100-year events are becoming more common. The 1 in 1,000-year events are actually, we're seeing those happen. So in a similar way to BNG, to go extra over and look at a net gain in terms of water management on sites where appropriate. Some sites actually, you have to manage it in a way that it doesn't also degrade the wider hydrological system. But that 10% allows better integration and storage. It allows better integration with BNG. And also, in some respects, as a sort of future proofing for the industry, a lot of potential development land in 2050 and onwards won't be there anymore. It will be high risk floodable areas. If we look at this and address this now, we're sort of safeguarding future development sites in future as well as sort of that sort of combined social, ecological, and if designed well, economic sort of betterment.
Now, some developers have complained about the cost of implementing BNG. Would this not have an additional negative impact on the cost of development and the price of new homes?
If designed correctly, I would say now I'd go back to the Terry's example, this sort of £1 million saving because it's designed in an integrated, holistic way. So I'd say if especially if it's integrated with things like BNG, those deliverables are required anyway as part of, again, legislation. So if we integrate the sort of SUDs with the BNG in the same sort of areas on site, you get a higher value BNG. You fulfill the function of the watercourses, and if the master plan is designed around these features, the value of the property is looking onto the green space and the open space is actually about 20% greater than they would be if not. So it has to be done in this sort of simple, robust way so that it's not a burden on the those that are taking on responsibility for it or the developers that are providing funding for it. So it's just that integrated, holistic design approach that means that it's deliverable, in my view.
The government seems to be placing a strong emphasis on built concrete infrastructure rather than improving water infiltration on farmland and other nature-based solutions. Is that the wrong approach?
Yes and no. I think the government's approach to the infrastructure as opposed to farmland has challenges, but I think the beauty of SUDs, in my view, is it's a sort of facilitative environmental mechanism to deliver any sort of infrastructure, really, as long as it's planned and embedded into the overarching design process. So taking flood schemes, integrating into those infrastructure developments, you can offset the impacts of the even heavy concrete sort of focused schemes. In terms of farmland, I think a lot of the DEFRA sort of focus at the moment is very much on soil quality and back to that sort of infiltration process. On development sites, conversely, soil quality isn't something that's necessarily looked at carefully as part of the SUD scheme. It tends to be the scrapings left over in some respects from the construction process. So I think there's elements that we can take from that sort of farmland management and infiltration process that can be applied to development to further benefit that approach. And equally on farmland, I think more can be done in terms of almost looking at SUD schemes on agri-environment schemes. Those sort of scrappy corners that can't be farmed or difficult to farm, to give them over to potential sort of SUD style schemes linked to the broader regional schemes that have been looked at. So the cumulative effects of even those smaller interventions on farmland could have a big impact overall.
That was Mark Topping from Lanpro. More news as ever on our website 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.